Good evening and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, businesses are preparing for another night of riots. We hear from a local nonprofit on how it's affecting the town's businesses. The Federal Reserve is expected to announce its new inflation target framework this week. Daniel Akaya, chief economist at Tressis, gives his take on the upcoming change and its possible impact. New home sales hit a 13-year high. Low mortgage rates and movement to the less populated areas have kept sales strong. And the US and China review phase one of the trade deal. Both say they're still committed to it, but China is far away from its goals. Tonight we start our coverage in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where businesses are getting ready for another night of rioting. Wisconsin's governor declared another state of emergency last night that saw rioting, looting, and arson in the wake of an officer-involved shooting. The injured party is reportedly paralyzed from the waist down. We spoke to the leader of a local nonprofit. She and her team are trying to stop more damage from being done to local businesses.
Businesses in Kenosha, Wisconsin are preparing for another night of chaos as the recent riots left many shop owners devastated. We spoke to Alex Robinson, director of Downtown Kenosha. She says some buildings are still on fire.
Right now in Uptown, there's still buildings on fire, unfortunately. I think the fire damage from last night's activities have been the worst in the city.
Alex is gathering 400 volunteers to board up shops and protect them from more vandalism.
Our small businesses really took a hit for vandalism. We had about 30 businesses that were kind of trashed and looted, completely taken out, like a lingerie store. There was a Boost Mobile store that was completely looted.
She says the local community has been amazing by showing support via donations, cleaning supplies, and food. But more riots are expected to come and help is still needed.
We're still in need of a lot of help and aid to come from funding and from materials to get these people safe.
Alex hopes the police and National Guard will help ease the situation for businesses. In the meantime, her team will be prepared for the unexpected. She says she looks forward to being able to rebuild the community. Phil Zoe, NTD News.
A New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says indoor dining may not return till 2021.
So of course we'll be back. If folks miss the theater, if they miss, the indoor dining, those things will be back. They'll be back next year at some point. I think that is overwhelmingly the case.
We talked to the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance about de Blasio's comment. The alliance represents more than 24,000 eating and drinking establishments, which employ more than 250,000 people.
You know, New York City restaurants are just in a financially devastated situation right now, and they need a plan to get reopened. We have more than 25,000 eating and drinking establishments throughout the 5 boroughs pre-pandemic, and we know that thousands are likely going to permanently shutter. If we don't get indoor dining before the new year, that number is going to certainly increase. So we need a plan to get open soon in a safe way. Of course, public health and safety needs to be paramount, but we have to do everything to try to mitigate the economic crisis that we're also in. And that's going to take indoor dining and support from federal, state, and local government to help these businesses just survive.
And how about when the weather gets colder?
So outdoor dining has been a huge help for so many restaurants. But let's be clear, there's about 10,000 restaurants participating, which is amazing. Some of them have more space than others. But you have more than 25,000 eating and drinking establishments. So less than 50% are even participating in outdoor dining. And when it starts getting cooler, outdoor dining really is not a feasible option. And in any case, it was never meant to sustain businesses. It was meant to help offset the reduced occupancy indoors by getting a little bit more occupancy outdoors. And without the indoor dining, it is just a very, very difficult and dire situation.
The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq hit all-time closing highs again today. Apple stock dropped, though, days ahead of its 4-to-1 stock split, with the Dow Jones Index having its biggest reshuffle in several years. Salesforce replaced ExxonMobil. Amgen took Pfizer's spot, and Raytheon was ousted by Honeywell. The Dow fell 60 points or 0.21%. S&P 500 gained 12 points or 0.36%. The Nasdaq added 87 points or 0.76%. And the Federal Reserve is expected to announce a new policy on inflation this week. It would allow inflation to run above the usual target of around 2% per year if it's been running below that level for several years. It's the latest chapter in the Fed's war against deflation. Deflation is basically a fall in the cost of goods and services. The Fed doesn't like deflation because it says people will spend less during times of deflation because they'll wait for prices to hit the bottom first. That loss of spending would then in turn hurt the economy. But Daniel Lacaille, chief economist at the Tressis hedge fund, says that the Fed's insisting that prices only rise hurts households and businesses. Say if wages fall and unemployment rises, like in the current pandemic, but the cost of goods keeps rising, the economy will stagnate and quality of life will get worse.
There is a case for moderate deflation because we need to understand that the reason why prices are coming down is not because there's any problem because households are deciding not to consume. It's because the economy is weak or because there's overcapacity or because the companies are being more efficient. Prices coming down is something that no consumer ever has been worried about. I don't know anyone that has ever left a supermarket saying it's intolerable because food prices are lower. Or I have never seen somebody coming out of a service station and saying gas prices are down, I cannot accept this. No, the reality is that moderate prices are very important. Central banks want prices to rise and inflation to go up. Why? Because they believe that that will sort of dissolve debt via inflation. And that happens only for governments. An average household, myself, a company, does not reduce its debt burden because of inflation. Why? Because the things that we purchase go up and the things that we earn go down in real terms. So the only one that benefits from inflation in order to reduce debt is actually government or the crony sectors that depend on inflation-linked pricing. None of those are the drivers of economic growth. And central banks need to change their attitude towards price moves because this obsession with increasing inflation is going to lead many economies to stagflation in at least the midterm.
So if people need to keep spending money for essentials like food and education, but constant inflation keeps making things more expensive, ask Daniel, what would this mean for him as the head of a household?
Think about this. We are in the middle of a tremendous crisis. And when I look at what we pay on a daily basis, food, education, healthcare, the different goods and services that we pay on a daily basis, none of those have fallen in a tremendous crisis. So I may be privileged because I have not suffered in my job. I have not lost my job. I continue to have more or less the same income. But think about the hundreds, the thousands of families that are seeing either their salaries cut or their jobs lost. The prices continue to go up. This is a problem, and it's a problem because the Fed is wrong and central banks are wrong about the idea that if prices fall, economic agents will decide to consume less and to postpone their consumption decisions. It's something that is based on old theories of very closed economy that do not work. I, as a household agent, as somebody in a household, I am not going to stop buying food, goods, services, education, paying for education, paying for healthcare because prices fall. And somebody that is looking to purchase a home is not going to decide to postpone the decision if that price is lower because it's a very important important decision for a family. So I think that what we need to stop is this idea that central banks need to combat deflation. It's a mistake. It ignores technology, disinflation, and the improvements in productivity. And it also is making it more difficult for the average household to make ends meet month after month, even in periods in which the economy is growing.
New single-family home sales rose to the highest rate in over 13 years in July. The housing market continues to show strong immunity to the crisis. The Commerce Department said new home sales rose nearly 14% to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of over 900,000 units. It's the highest level since December 2006. Record low interest rates and a migration to the low-density residential areas are driving the increase. And 340,000 fewer mortgages were past due in July. That's 9% less than June. But seriously delinquent mortgages of over 90 days rose by 376,000. The median price of a new home sold in July increased to $330,000. That's up 7% from last year. And also some bright spots in retail. First, people are loving their pandemic pizza. Papa John's says its North American sales are up 24% over the past 4 weeks, and sales jumped about the same internationally. Pizza delivery is a long-time tradition that's thriving while many still stay close to home, as other restaurants are struggling. Papa John's recently announced it's hiring 20,000 new workers to meet America's surging demand for pizza. And JM Smucker has raised its full-year targets after beating estimates for first-quarter earnings. This comes off strong demand for its coffee, frozen sandwiches, and peanut butter from stuck-at-home consumers. The company's CEO says consumers are spending more and coming back more often. Smucker says it plans to boost its coffee production. And Europe's largest economy seems to be on the road to recovery after shrinking nearly 10% in the second quarter. German business morale improved more than expected in August, with new data showing both manufacturing and services picked up steam.
The German economy contracted by a record 9.7% in the second quarter. Data released Tuesday showed consumer spending, investment and exports all collapsed. The fall was much stronger than during the financial crisis and the sharpest decline since records began 50 years ago. Consumer spending was down just under 11%, while both capital investments and exports fell by around a fifth. Europe's largest economy, more used to balanced budgets and fiscal prudence, recorded a deficit of $61 billion for the first 6 months of the year. Though employment only edged down 1.3% on the year, a sign efforts to protect the labour market have paid off. Looking ahead, the German central bank expects household spending to drive a strong recovery in the third quarter. Business sentiment is also up in August, according to the IFO Institute. It said the German economy is, quote, on the road to recovery. Its business climate index rose to 92.6 from a downwardly revised 90.4 in July. This was the fourth monthly increase in a row and came in better than expectations for 92.2.
And coming up, a Texas professor and NASA researcher is arrested for concealing his involvement with Chinese institutions. He allegedly received Chinese funds outside of his U.S. employment. And Chinese officials say they'll meet the Phase 1 trade deal targets, but one expert we spoke to says they may be playing politics. Hear what he has to say after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. the Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
A Texas engineering professor who also worked with NASA has been arrested for hiding his ties to China. His NASA contract prohibited him from collaborating with China or any Chinese company or university.
A Texas A&M University professor has been arrested and charged for concealing his ties to China while working for NASA. Engineering professor Chung Jong-dong was arrested on August 23rd and charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and making false statements. Prosecutors allege that Chung purposely hid his ties to Chinese state-backed organizations while leading a NASA research team that received a grant from the organization. The Justice Department says that under NASA's grant terms, he was not allowed to work with Chinese institutions. Prosecutors say Chung had access to NASA resources related to the International Space Station and leveraged that to advance his standing at a Chinese university. According to prosecutors, he participated in 2 Chinese talent plans and also applied for the 1,000 Talents plan at a university in Hefei. The DOJ complaint says Chung lied to both his university and NASA about these connections. U.S. officials have warned that programs like these incentivize foreign researchers to transfer technology and information to China. Chung faces a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison if found guilty on all 3 charges.
U.S. and Chinese trade officials are reaffirming their commitment to Phase 1 of the current trade deal. They spoke on the phone recently, even though China is way behind on its obligations.
The US and China say they're still committed to the Phase 1 trade deal. China is way behind on its commitments.
As of June, for instance, we know Chinese purchases were less than 1/3 predicted in energy, a little bit over 1/3 predicted in agricultural goods, and about half, which is about half on manufacturing goods.
But it seems the US is still willing to work with them, a written statement calling the meeting progress. But Professor Colares is skeptical about China's desire to fill their promise. He thinks they're taking advantage of the fact it's an election year.
They have taken advantage of the U.S. electoral calendar, right? They're trying to delay Chinese commitments. They're trying to delay purchases that they had committed to making under the Phase 1 deal.
Colares says China may be waiting for better terms after the election should Trump lose. Bloomberg said China will need to buy out $130 billion of goods in the second half of the year to meet their obligations.
And the United States has denounced an unfavorable ruling from the World Trade Organization. It's over a long-standing dispute with Canada over lumber imports.
The WTO said in a Monday ruling that the U.S. Commerce Department incorrectly calculated the level of Canadian government subsidies on softwood lumber exports to the United States. The Trump administration relied on the Commerce Department calculations to set tariffs of around 18% on Canadian lumber. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said WTO applied an erroneous interpretation that would shield what he called Canada's massive lumber subsidies from countervailing duties by the United States. Countervailing duties are tariffs imposed under WTO rules to neutralize the negative impacts of subsidies by other countries. Canadian authorities hailed the WTO decision. Its Minister of International Trade said the ruling confirms that U.S. duties on Canadian softwood are completely unwarranted and unfair. The lumber dispute dates back to the 1980s. 2 previous rounds of WTO cases from 2001 and 2006 concluded with an agreement that expired in 2015, prompting the Trump administration's tariffs.
And still to come. Wirecard officially starts its insolvency proceedings in Germany. It's had to lay off over half its remaining staff in the country. With many people now working from home, food trucks have lost their typical customers. Find out how one is staying afloat this summer when we return.
We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth. 90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. The Epoch Times is independent. We're not controlled by any special interests, and we never will be. The Epoch Times is a non-partisan media. That means we don't stand for any political party. This is a battle between truth and deceit, a battle between forces that would ensnare this country in ignorance, and between a media that wants to present you with the truth. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board.
The collapsed payments company Wirecard has let go over half its remaining staff in Germany. It's also terminated the contracts of its board members. This is according to its insolvency administrator, Michael Jaffe. Wirecard began its official insolvency proceedings today. Jaffe says it would need far-reaching cuts to keep its core business operational. He said he's working to sell Wirecard's global assets. Last week, it agreed to do its first deal to sell its operations in Brazil. And winemakers in France's Champagne region are gathering a bumper grape harvest this week. But there might be a bitter aftertaste. The slump in demand because of the virus means some of the harvest may unfortunately go to waste.
Workers in France's Champagne region are bringing in the harvest, and it looks like a bumper crop of grapes for this year's bubbly. That's thanks to a hot, dry summer that has helped the fruit ripen super fast. Vineyard operator Vincent Leglantier says an August harvest comes as a shock.
We've never seen this in the history of the Champagne region. It's the first time that we're starting this early. To remind you, I'm 34, and 20 years ago, the norm was to start harvesting around September 15th or 20th. My mother is 74, and 50 years ago, it was normal to harvest around October 15th.
And for the industry, the trouble is that a bumper early harvest is exactly what isn't needed right now. Champagne makers are grappling with a slump in demand for the fizzy drink. The virus crisis has hammered sales in their 3 top markets, the UK, the US and Japan. Damien Champy runs a vineyard cooperative.
Of course, during the pandemic, the loss in sales led to an excess in stock of about 30 million bottles, so it's colossal, considering the total sales in 2019 of 298 million bottles, plus a stock that already existed. So today in the Champagne region, we have a stock of more than 1 billion bottles, so it's absolutely colossal.
That has producers worried about a glut, which could drive down prices and tarnish Champagne's exclusive image. In response, they've decided to cap the quantity of grapes that can be brought in. Anything over the agreed amount has to be left in the fields to rot. Turning things around next year will require a world in more celebratory mood.
And before the pandemic, food trucks in Seattle depended on office workers downtown. But with many people now working from home, the suburbs have become the best place to sell their meals and snacks.
The Dreamy Drinks truck recently headed to the suburban city of Linwood. A neighborhood association with more than 800 homes requested their business. The owners say they're making almost as much money as they used to during a typical summer.
With the weather being so nice and not being able to go to the city, we were worried we wouldn't be able to make the money that we made last summer. But actually, we've been doing pretty good.
Yum yum sauce? Julie Schwab first organized an event for food trucks in her area back in June. She says the food trucks are bringing people together, giving them a chance to socialize. Now she's scheduling trucks 7 days a week into December.
So many of us are working from home and are stuck at home, and there's just this point where it feels isolating. And you look what's happening with everybody coming out, and people are getting to know each other, people are supporting the trucks.
The owners say customers have changed, with most of their business now being children studying and parents working from home. According to them, their new customers are grateful for them to be there.
It's a lot more friendly. There's a lot more energy. A lot of people are happier to see us.
Despite the virus, there's still a healthy appetite for food trucks and their snacks.
And that's the latest business updates for today. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.